I want to welcome everyone to the second episode of the Old Grey Mayors. My first guest was elected to council in 1973, the year regional government was formed. It was a time when a term in office lasted 2 years. In 2003, he was elected mayor and remained mayor in the township until his retirement in 2014. 31 years in public municipal office. That's a lot of elections. He's won elections, he's been defeated, he's been acclaimed, and he left public office on his own terms. I'm pleased to say he's my friend, Ross Kelterborn, and he's an old grey mayor. Ross, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Thank you. Very well.
I'm glad to have you here. And do I have it correct, Ross? You were born and raised in Wellesley?
That's correct.
And what year were you born in Wellesley?
1939.
And just a little background. It's kind of interesting because I had Doug Craig here for the first show, and this is our second show, and I'm glad to have you here. Doug Craig was a teacher, and you were a teacher.
Yes.
When were you a teacher?
Well, I started my career in a little hamlet of Kingwood, in a one-room school, all 8 grades, and that's where my wife came from, and in Wellesley Township, by the way.
Okay.
So, in that time, Wellesley, the village of Wellesley, was part of the township, but it had separated from the township and became an incorporated village.
Right. But you were a teacher for how long?
34 and a half years.
Now, were you done teaching when you first started in politics, or were you doing the two at the same time?
Yes,
okay.
I was, yes.
And I was gonna ask you if it was a one-room schoolhouse, but you already answered that. It was.
Right. And the interesting thing, just a week ago Saturday, we had a school reunion.
Okay.
For that particular group.
Kingwood. Nice,
That's right.
Nice. So, Russ, when you and I first met, we were both elected in 2010. And I remember our first meeting very well. At the time, Regional Chair Ken Sealing got us all together, brought together the 4 township mayors for a breakfast. And from that, it led us to create what we called amongst ourselves the Rural Caucus.
Right.
You remember that time?
I certainly do.
And for me, it was a great opportunity to see what's happening in other townships, being a new mayor, and learning from people like yourself. So I want to thank you for all that you taught me during that time about some of the good practices that were happening in other places that we could bring back. But it was interesting because Ken was always concerned about the township caucus.
Yes, he was, and if you'll allow me, I'll just add a little bit here. Ken came to me in regards to that particular point, and I told him immediately, I said, Mr. Sealing, I said, you must know me better than that.
Yeah.
And I said, I will report to you immediately if I feel that this is a sort of an underground type of thing.
Yeah.
They work against council, and I never heard from him again.
Because we never did anything that way.
That's right, and I want to thank you for doing that, because that was one of the things. And as I understand, the existing council today in 2019 is still using that process.
Yeah, in fact, they've expanded on that now, and they include the CAOs in their meetings. So it's a good way to reach out and connect and deal with common sorts of issues.
That's
I know
right.
For me, for example, in North Dumfries Township, we had a part-time fire chief. He was a truck mechanic by day and a fire chief at night. And when I learned that Wellesley and other places had full-time fire chiefs, we immediately moved to get a full-time fire chief installed. Right. The one time I can ever recall there was a bit of an uprising amongst the group of us was over the waste transfer stations.
Oh, yes.
If you remember that, we always had those battles about keeping the rural waste transfer stations open.
Yeah.
And there was that one time during the budget process where they were all supposed to be cut, and then lo and behold, some money became available to keep the one in Elmira open.
Strange.
Strange, with your eyebrows raised. But I have to say, I don't know if you remember, but at that time, you raised a question of fairness, and you basically led the charge through that concept of fairness. And what was the outcome of that?
Well, the outcome was that we wound up having a regional garbage collection in Wellesley Township, and that's the way it was.
Yeah.
And the reason, the fairness that I was concerned about, I wasn't aware at the time that, as you recall, Jack Young, that's what regional government was all about, was everybody was to be the same.
Right.
However, we did have the choice of choosing how many bags per pickup we were allowed to have, and we chose 3 to keep the cost to the taxpayers at a good cost.
Because each of the townships is responsible for their waste collection. But the other thing I wanted to point out was, while Elmira was going to get back their transfer station through your arguments about fairness,
Yep.
we got that money spread amongst all 4 townships.
That's right.
So that we were able to keep those waste transfer stations open a little while longer.
Yeah.
So, Ross, I just want to ask you, back to 73, what motivated you to run for public office?
Well, at that particular time, the incorporated village had decided to introduce sanitary sewers to our village. And of course, that was a very controversial thing at that particular time. And that was one of the things that taught me that, when you get to a certain age in life and your income is fixed, and all of a sudden somebody decides that they're going to make a change in your community that's going to cost you more money.
Yeah.
That was the first time I sort of looked at things that way, and
right.
It sort of put out a path for me. And I actually objected to the sanitary sewers in the village of Wellesley because I was satisfied with the way things were.
Right.
And anyway, we didn't win. And
so, Russ, you're talking about the sanitation sewer issue, and when you got elected, was that still a live issue in '73?
No, I think that had there was an OMB hearing, by the way, about that.
Yeah.
And of course, it passed.
It passed. So by the time you got elected, it was already
a done deal.
Done deal. Okay.
That's right.
But development has to happen, I guess, in a township to grow. Is that your experience?
That's correct. And when we have a perfect example of it right now with LRT. Those are things. Yeah. But the way the region was set up, and that's the way LRT was, if you weren't part of it, you didn't have to pay toward it.
Right.
And that's the way it went for North Dumfries, for Wellesley, Wilmot, and Village. And that was the important thing as far as I was concerned about being in regional government.
Right.
Anyway.
So, and in the township, and we're going to talk about LRT, but I just want to go back. When the sewer systems were installed, then that led to development, and would you consider that a positive or a negative overall?
Well, it sort of depends which side of the coin you sit on age-wise.
Right.
I was quite satisfied with Wellesley Village as it was, 700 or 800 people. And, we have neighboring villages right around us in Perth County that still are like that and get along fine. But you have to get on the wagon sometimes when things move along. Yeah. And that was the choice that I made after the OMB. We had a chance to say what we wanted to say. It didn't pass, and so you support things like that then.
And when you were a citizen, before you got elected, were you involved in that OMB hearing? Did you make a representation?
I made a presentation. I was on the list of speaking, yes.
Okay, so that activity spurred you on then?
Well, that was just one of the things. There was another gentleman by the name of Bob Gramlow who was a friend of our family, and he had sort of suggested that I might try running for for council at that time.
Had you ever run for anything before?
No. And the reason that I really got involved in that, I didn't take part. I belonged to the Wellesley Board of Trade at one time for a short period of time, but I never was involved with the Lions Club or any of those committees. So I felt that this was my way of giving back to the community.
Right.
And my aspirations were right at Wellesley Township, nowhere else. I had no intention of running for mayor or anything like that.
So, and eventually that changed, but I just want to talk to you about development. And one of the things when I was reading some of the newspaper articles about when you retired, and they looked back on your years in municipal politics. And one of the things that you commented about was arenas and community centers and how you were proud of what you were able to build there. Can you just talk about that for a moment?
Well, the first thing you have to understand about small townships, and I'm sure you're aware, being in North Dumfries, without volunteerism, you are pretty well behind the eight ball tax-wise.
Yeah, you need the community base for sure to help you out.
That's correct. And when you get involved in municipal politics at the level that you and I were involved in, you soon find out how important those volunteers are. And not only in the village of Wellesley, which had been an incorporated village, but in the other parts of the townships like St. Clements and Linwood, they built their own community centers on volunteerism.
Right.
Wellesley was lucky enough at the time when we built our arena that Wintario was just in the works, and we were able to take part of that Wintario grant.
Right.
However, the people in Wellesley set up a committee. There was a committee that was formed, and we went around and knocked on doors and got the money required for the township to take part in that.
So you're doing grassroots fundraising.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and that was a big thing for us in North Dumfries as well.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, when we were building our community center, we raised $2.15 million out of the community. Now this is in 2009 or what have you, so it's about some years, about 40 years or 30 years after, 35 years after you're doing your thing. But it was an important part of getting the community moving, because without the grassroots movement, I'm not sure council would have took the initiative on their own.
Well, there's no doubt about it. In Wellesley Township, at least, if they had not raised that money and had to put that on the tax tab, I would not have been in favor of it. That's the way it worked. But I just want to say that Linwood and St. Clements, they did it on their own. The people that were bricklayers and framers and those things all donated their services to those projects.
Yeah, and that's the type of community involvement you love to see. But what I want to talk about, though, is about the arenas and that sort of thing. We're actually going through some questions today. In Kitchener, for example, you may have seen the news where they're talking about a capital levy to try and build new arenas, or replace the existing facilities, because they don't have, as we all know, the capital infrastructure deficit faced by all municipalities. So they're going through this question about whether to raise additional funds to replace what they had.
Yes.
And I know in Wellesley, just to take a look at it was only like a microcosm of the issue, the Wellesley Arena has just gone through a situation where it was recently determined that the roof was leaking, the insulation was getting wet and heavy, which caused a risk for a snow load, which could cause the roof to collapse. So then the council said we're shutting it down for the season, which then forced, now as a result of that, with no facility, community groups like Ringette or girls hockey, boys hockey, adult leagues all had to find another place to go. So they were thinking about St. Clements. And then St. Clements said, well, we can't take on everything, and some of the adult leagues were possibly not going to happen. This is the sort of disruption that happens when you can't take care of the infrastructure. So then the township, working quickly, decided, well, we're going to spend money to get architectural drawings to make an application for a grant coming up. And then they said, okay, then another option came up to replace the roof membrane to give them another 10 years or so.
Yes.
So this is the sort of angst, and I know Mayor Nowak was a rough time for him because he kind of commented on that in some of the news stories about how difficult it was, because it's a lot of stress.
Yeah.
A lot of these small towns, as you know, tell us about what does an arena mean to a small community?
Well, it's a sort of a central meeting place for young people. And in Wellesley, of course, all of the different things that have transpired from there that were not in the other arena that we had, the old arena, like roller skating and so on. It's a thing in which the whole community gets behind even in the building of it, and more so in St. Clements and Linwood, where they actually physically went out and did those kinds of things, where we went around and collected the money. But for the people in Wellesley, it's a meeting place. That's about the best I could say for. And
it's important for the community.
Yeah.
When you take that away, it leaves a big hole in the community. But here's the thing that I think is interesting about all of this. You talk about how you raised the money to build the facility, and it required people going around collecting the money. I'm sure the township contributed something to as in the partnership, and then you also got the Ontario grant money as well. And you build it, and you start to operate it, and you repair it, but we never think about putting money aside to replace it, right? Tell me your thoughts on that.
Well, that I have to be a little careful here because that goes back quite a ways. But as I remember, when we built the sewers in Wellesley, the rates that were set for that sewer situation, what the people were going to pay at that time, was built into that rate a replacement cost within X number of years.
Right.
And I don't recall that happening at the arena. And I guess you would say that would be the responsibility of the council of the day.
Yeah, we're not looking to blame anyone. It was just a general thought that, we don't think about those things sometimes. We don't start putting money aside.
That's right. And I think that's something that, it's rather difficult to do that because of the way inflation works with money.
Yeah.
But that would be a good idea for the existing councils to set something like that up when they build a new project or whatever.
So back in 75, was it 75 when you built the arena?
Approximately.
Yeah, and so you're on council then.
Yes.
And had that issue ever been discussed, or if you had thought about that, would things have been different at all?
Never come up in any meetings that I recall.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
But it's certainly a good idea.
Yeah, and that's where you get into the dilemmas today.
That's right.
That we don't put money aside to take care of those issues going into the future.
Yeah.
So some of the other things that you had built, you talked about community centers, skateboard parks. Can you talk about some of that stuff that you were involved with?
Well, the community centers, like I mentioned in St. Clements and Linwood, that was done by the volunteers mainly. They got grants, but not to the extent that Wellesley Village did, because it just happened that Ontario was available at that particular time. And the funny thing of it is, their arenas and community centers are still standing, and ours ran into this problem. And, a lot of that happened during the time when I was mayor. And I feel very guilty about that situation. However, it's a staff, like it's for the council, for myself, but when you're the head of the municipality, you're supposed to be looking after those
yes,
things.
And I totally understand what you're saying, because I ran into the same situation. When you have a year-end deficit, for example, when you're the mayor, you're the fall person.
That's right.
Right? You take the successes, but you also take responsibilities for the failures. But as you've said, you talked about this concept of the horses pulling the wagon.
Yep.
All right. And what does that mean to you, the horses pulling the wagon?
Well, that everybody takes part. And that's what I tried to do in the township when I became mayor. And I spread the the workload around amongst the councillors. Like in our committees, each committee had a chairman, and that chairman, when we would get into personnel, for an example, that was his responsibility to deal with those particular problems.
Right.
And it worked very well, and because it gave at least I felt it gave the councillors more of a feeling of being really involved in the operation of the corporation.
Yeah.
And,
so even though when bad things happen, we as the mayor take responsibility for that, but we like to adopt the team approach, which is council and staff working together. Right. Was that the approach you were taking?
Oh, definitely. And when you have good people around you, both council-wise and staff-wise, that's the whole secret to the game.
Yeah, and you had some really good people.
I had the best.
Yeah, Susan Duke.
You got it.
Right.
Will McLaughlin.
Yeah.
And Kevin Beggs, and all of them were very, very capable people.
Okay, so I just want to touch on two things quick. All right. So I mentioned at the start of the show that you had an election loss.
Yes.
All right. Tell us what was the issue?
Well, it's a funny thing. It didn't bother me that much. I think I was time for rest.
Yeah. What was it that caused was there a particular issue at the time?
Not that I'm aware of.
Oh, it was just a general people felt.
That's going back for a bit, Rob.
Yeah.
It didn't bother me. That's the thing that puzzled me. I thought I'd be very upset about that.
Right.
But I wasn't.
Oh, good.
And I remember when I ran for the position of mayor, my wife said to me, she says, "What do you want to be involved with all of that problems and so on?" And I said, "Well, it's a challenge." And that's what it was.
And for all the campaigning you did and all the times that you did win, what was the secret to your success in those campaigns?
Well, the key to success is going around, knocking on the door, talking to people, and that's the success, in my opinion, as to winning elections. People, even though I've been told by other people that, sometimes people don't want to talk to you. Well, they always answer the door.
Yeah.
And I never ever had anybody told me to go on home.
Yeah, I think for all the technology that's out there, people still appreciate that face-to-face.
That's correct. And when they have a problem, they can deal with you specifically, and you've got to have answers. If you don't have the answers, I'll get back to you.
Yeah.
And you get back.
And do that in a prompt manner.
That's exactly right.
Well, and Ross, I just wanted to thank you for coming in today, and I just want to say again that my 4 years on regional council actually, I forgot to mention, we shared an office together.
That's correct.
For those 4 years. But my 4 years on regional council were made a lot easier and a lot smoother by the fact that I had someone like you to turn to for questions from time to time. And also my time as mayor in North Dumfries was also made more effective by the things that I was able to learn from your experience as well. So listen, thanks again for coming out to be on the show, and all the best.
Thank you very much, Bob, and thanks for the opportunity to have this little chat together.
My pleasure.